Well, friends, welcome once again. It is a sad day today. We're going to talk all about that. Of course, I have my special guest, the Solitary Adventurer, with us. We're going to talk about all things Prince today. It's a very sad day, and I'm going to talk to him about it. So much to talk about today. But greetings, welcome again. And where are you at?
Hi, I'm in the Peak District, so sort of Derbyshire. One of the prettiest parts of the country, I have to admit. So just having a quiet day today and sort of reminiscing on all things purple.
So what do you like to do on like? I'll talk about my side of the whole Prince thing. It's not going to take very long because I'm learning about his greatness, and I have been for the past 6 months or whatever it's been.
Yeah.
But you've been a fan for many years. So what do you do typically around his day of the anniversary of his passing?
Yeah, it kind of stems from the day when he passed. So I was in work. I was working on a trading desk at the time, and we'd just finished for the day. And then the news broke that somebody had died at Paisley Park, and it was, within an hour they knew it was Prince. And I went straight home and put on the Current, which is Minneapolis Public Radio, and they just had a 24-hour sort of vigil for Prince. So they just played his music nonstop. And that kind of stuck with me. So each anniversary now, first thing I do when I get up is put Purple Current, which is the stream that they created.
Mm-hmm.
And it plays 24-hour Prince for the day.
Okay.
So I've been listening to that mostly today.
Well, before I tell about my brief side of this, we have a wonderful community here on the YouTube channel. Everyone understands I can't do everything about Prince, but I try and make it a fairly strong portion of the channel. And we have a wonderful community in the comment section. I've met a lot of wonderful people. We have a wonderful community starting up on Patreon. For any of those who aren't sure what it's about, you can head on over to my Patreon at Yes You Can Play Guitar. I'm wondering what everyone else does. This is a very special, sad day. It's a very special day in a sad way. On Patreon, we had talked amongst the members about what we all do. And in all honesty, this is my first year of really going, oh my God, like he's gone. But it'd be interesting in the comments section to see what everyone thinks. Like, what do you do on this day? It's the 21st of April. For me, the biggest thing that hits me is the fact that when he died in 2016, I'm going to be honest, guys, my life was a mess. 2016 was a year I wish I could just forget forever or redo. But so I remember hearing that he died, and I remember being in all the news, but I had enough problems at the time in my life. But what I find remarkable now is a year ago, I would have probably seen a news headline of a reminder of his passing, 5-year passing last year. I would have thought about it for a minute or two. I would have felt a bit of sadness and said, oh, like he was a talented guy. But now it's consuming. Now that I'm kind of in this world, I'm finding it more consuming. I was really, everyone saw my reaction video to Sometimes It Snows in April, and it just triggered a lot of feelings about like how crazy our world is, and when you really love someone and they're not there anymore. Someone special to me, I really thought of very vividly. But last night I was very sad. I watched a few documentaries on Prince, and watched a long interview with Morris Day talking about his time with Prince and his relationship with Prince. And today it's a sad feeling. Like I'm enjoying this and I want to do this, but for those people that probably don't even feel like working or doing too much today, it'd be a good day to just order a pizza or something, But it is very remarkable. And I wanted to get everyone's take on what they do when he passed away, which brings me to our next topic. We're going to jump around a little bit. At some point in time, we'll discuss how we can do this on a live stream, if it's even technically possible, so that you and I can be talking and get everyone, because the community is very important, to get their questions, comments, and we'll get all that figured out with time. Everyone knows that we just passed the 1K subscriber amount less than a week ago, so I'm still kind of getting caught up with all these new features that we can use. But so we got to talk about this Prince 100 Rolling Stones top 100 guitar list, because Anthony Smith, I believe his name was. He's a great member of our community here. He asked me, he said, "Well, you're a guitar player. Where would you put Prince in the top 100?" So I went to the Rolling Stone magazine and I pulled up a list. My understanding was that he was never in the top 100, which we all know is ludicrous. And I looked at, I think it was a 2011 list. I guess they put one out every year. Is that true, or?
I don't know. I thought it was maybe every 10 years, because the one that caused all the kerfuffle amongst the Prince community was the 2001, I think it was. And when he got the opportunity, 2004, to really let go at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that was the way that he could silence them. But I mean, even that list now, even now, I can't make sense of how they've decided to rank people.
Like what? Like, okay, and of course the video's got a big reaction, and a lot of people are commenting, and I was just looking at the list going like, what is the criteria? At the beginning of the video, I said, we all can agree that when it comes to the overall complete total package, and I'm speaking just with guitar, technical proficiency, composition, stage presence, all that other stuff, like Prince is the man. I would never argue that. But but again, it's like, what is the criteria based on? Like my Steve Vai wasn't even in the top 100. that just blew my mind. From a technical perspective. Yeah, and I mean, Steve Vai sold millions of albums as like a solo guitar player. Like he's a god in the end. And we've talked about Prince and Steve Vai. They had a mutual respect for each other at the very least. But Steve Vai was a Prince fan. But John McLaughlin, number 68, and then Johnny Ramone was like number 28, and you're like going, what? Like
the one that I found funny was George Harrison, because I mean, a lot of the ones, don't spit it out, a lot of the ones that are famous on Beatles records, like Eric Clapton steps in. So I mean, he was a good guitarist, George Harrison, but he's not top 100, is he? So I don't know. The whole thing, it's just such a strange list.
Oh my God, that was funny. I'm looking at like I'm not taking anything away from this.
But the funny thing for me was when you sort of reordered him. Would I put him above this one? Yeah. And I thought, wait till you get to like the top 10. And I mean, Elmo's in there, and Big Bird, and it's such a strange top 10. So I thought this isn't going to end well. But it's the one for me is technicality. Like on a technical point of view, is he capable of doing what you're doing? 300 notes a minute. It's a different style of play, isn't it? And that maybe discounts him for a lot of people.
I would never ever want to compare myself to Prince, because he would just destroy me on stage. And like someone made a comment in the comment section. They just said, could you imagine if Prince only focused on guitar? And I'm like, I've been saying this for months now. Like, people don't understand. Yes, he would have been getting ready for rehearsals, and I checked out some interesting rehearsal videos. As you know, I have people sending me tons of stuff all the time. And if he focused on guitar, like he probably would have been the first person with an 8-string guitar, because he would have been so bored with 6. Like I guess we'll get into this a little bit. I get, like, one of the most technically amazing guitar players of all time. He passed away several years ago. His name is Sean Lane, and he was 15 years old, and he got a national gig with Black Oak, Arkansas in the 70s. You can look back and seeing some of his live solos, and it's scary. You're like, oh my God. But the thing is what was his? He was a good songwriter and stuff, but he wasn't much to watch on stage. And they often would say, like, with Alan Holdsworth, there'd be a few like guitar heads go and just watch his hands on the guitar neck. But to the general masses, that wouldn't have translated if you weren't really into guitar. Like an average person would say, oh, okay, that person's good. But where Prince, like, just watch that Super Bowl performance. He had, was it 100 million? And the people watching on TV, and it must have been 80,000 people there. It was in an NFL stadium.
Yeah,
he had them in the palm of his hands. You could hear them all singing the melodies, the Purple Rain and everything. Sorry, my caffeine, folks. I'm a little chattier than normal today, but I got to tell you, I really needed that laugh about George Harrison because I mean, there's a bit of a somber mood today, but so I guess what I'm getting at is what was it based on? And me, I try and be as polite as I can when I do these videos. I don't know if it's the Canadian in me or what it is, but folks, I want to stress at the very least, I said I would put him in the top 15 at the very least. But again, it's like coming down to like, what's it based on? Like, I have a respect for Neil Young as a songwriter, and he did a few cool things and everything, and he's fellow Canadian and all that stuff, but you can't put him on the same page as Prince with guitar. So, and I also want to get this in as well, and you guys have probably seen, who follow every one of my videos, that interview with Gary Holt from Exodus. Okay, so he's this, he is revered in the metal guitar world. Slayer was a very popular. He was in what was called the Big Four. You had Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer in thrash metal. And one of their guitar players had passed away, and he just filled in for years, and as well as running Exodus. He's a phenomenal guitar player. He's a Prince fan. Like, he made it very clear in that interview where they said, "Who's better, Prince or Eric Clapton?" He's like, "Is it even a comparison?" Like, and I tried to put a little bit off on Gary. That's why I put that clip in, but I agree with him too. I think Prince is definitely way ahead of Clapton.
I think just for versatility, I can't think of anyone who's as versatile. Is he the greatest blues player? No, but the fact that he could stand on a stage in theory next to someone like Clapton and not get shown up, like when Clapton was stronger than he is now. So I just sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. But you had mentioned that about him, the technical prowess. If Prince wanted to get his picking, his alternate picking is great. If he wanted to get to the point where he could do 16th notes at 800 beats, do you think anything's going to stop him? He's like, no, I'm already good. I'm going to be too busy writing awesome songs and making money. So yeah. I would never, ever want to be. I had someone in the comments say, well, would you have even been in the top 100? I said, dude, I wouldn't even be in the top 10,000, man. I'm very humble and know my place in the pecking order of the world here.
Do one day they might find something in the vault and it's Prince just doing Anthrax songs. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised,
Yeah, but I do know enough from his playing. He must have liked some heavier bands too. There was that one song he went into a really heavy riff, and I'm like, yeah, if he listened to some heavier bands, it wouldn't surprise me.
So in what would have been early 70s, as a teenager, the band that they had, so Andre Simone, Morris Day on drums. Grand Central, yeah. Later renamed to Champagne. Mm-hmm. They were playing anything that was on the radio. And considering Minneapolis radio is not going to be Oakland radio, we're talking the full gamut here. So they listened to everyone, they played everyone. And obviously Santana is the one that we sort of think of the major influence. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that they were listening to everything, and Prince himself always ranked Joni Mitchell as one of his big influences.
And I have to
it shows how broad.
Joni Mitchell, again, folks, I embarrassingly, I'm honest. I've been upfront about my education about Prince. Joni Mitchell, I remember my brother mentioned her a few times. I have an older brother, he's 10 years older than me, but and I've read since that she's influenced even jazz artists. She's a tremendous songwriter, musician. I don't know enough about her, and I am planning on doing some reaction videos to some of her stuff. If there's something you could suggest, please comment in the comment section. But I'm just saying, I'm embarrassed as a Canadian who's a lifetime musician. I don't know much about her. It's really sad.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan myself. I've heard the songs that are referenced. Mm-hmm. I even had a listen to, I think it's Hijira, the album that Prince actually bought a few days before he passed.
Yeah.
During Record Store Day, he went and bought a handful of CDs. That was one of them. She's very interesting, but it's a very sort of traditional singer-songwriter, certainly the bits that I've heard. So I don't think people would immediately say Prince would be an idol. Joni would be an idol to Prince. But he said it over and over. And, she actually remembers a time where she played Minneapolis, and there's this 10-year doe-eyed boy just staring up at her, won't move his eyes from it. And that's Prince. She said that, I don't know whether it's apocryphal now that he's passed, but she claimed that she would get fan letters from him. And it would be, the sort of text speak to you for, the Prince lingo. And the management would just throw them in the bin, thinking it was, some nut job. But I don't know how truthful that is, or whether she's embellished it a little for posterity. But yeah, he was a big fan.
So anyway, that's our discussion about the top 100 guitar list. I don't want to give it. There was a bit of fun in there, but I don't know if you could see my angst when I was scrolling through this. I already knew when I started scrolling at 100. I was kind of, even before I recorded the video, I thought, this is going to be tough. It's a no-win situation, but I think we all agree.
Personally, for me, for every copy that they've sold of Rolling Stone on the back of not having him in it or having him in it, I begrudge them because it's a lot of publicity that they really don't deserve as a magazine these days.
Do you remember, though, there was a famous quote, Rolling Stone, many years ago. They wanted to put Frank Zappa on the cover of the Rolling Stone. And you know what Frank Zappa said? I don't know. Have you ever heard about this?
No.
And Frank Zappa he told him, he said, "Why the F would I let you use my picture so you can sell more magazines and make more money?" So
good on Frank.
Frank was an eclectic too. Like he kind of saw things his way and he spoke his mind, and that's wonderful. So anyway, I think there's a consensus among all of us. I appreciated it. I had a really good reaction to the video. It got people talking. But at the same time, I think we all agree that the whole list it's just silliness. The whole thing is just kind of like, we're all throwing our hands in the air saying, hey, let's move on. So we talked a lot about the revolution last time we talked. One topic, if you want to, we can get into it today, is this whole deal with the record label, the whole slave thing on his face, the whole, I've heard a lot of, my time in music, I'd heard enough horror stories about dealing with record labels. Should we get in and talk about that today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting topic because having lived through it, it was kind of misrepresented. Certainly mass media didn't appreciate. So let's give a little bit of history. Prince has done very well for Warner Brothers. He's been with them his whole career. Round about 1985, straight after Purple Rain, he decides that each album is going to be significantly different artistically than the last one. And that is reflected in his commercial success. So Purple Rain is a massive hit, sells 14, 15 million in the first year, but then the follow-up does 5 million. So it's a big change. By the time the late 90s have come around, you've got this guy who's artistically fantastic and he's covered a lot of ground, but commercially he's kind of not his former success or peak. So going into the 90s, you've got hip hop arriving, or rap as it would be called back then. And it starts to derail sort of mainstream music. And then you start getting the pop bands who can sell signing these enormous contracts. So Madonna gets a big contract. Michael Jackson gets a big contract. Janet Jackson gets, for a period of time, the biggest contract in the world of all time. And I think Prince looked at it and thought, well, musically, I'm better than any of these, from a talent point of view. So he goes to Warner Brothers, and when it's renegotiation time, and he wants the headline $100 million contract. And some of the things that he has to step back and say, okay, well, sure, let's do it that way, provided I get the contract, involves an imprint of Warner Brothers label that he's been running called Paisley Park Records. and he's been making albums for girlfriends and artists that he likes, and they haven't been selling well. Now, one of the things when he goes for this $100 million contract is that they're going to sort of put their foot down, and maybe these things need to be commercially minded. So he makes all these agreements. Now, the record industry in those times worked on, you do an album, you tour for a couple of years, you milk that album for all it's worth. You might take 5, 6 singles off of that album. Now, everything up until 1990, does that sound like Prince to you?
Mm-hmm.
So already, before he's even inked the contract, everyone around him, particularly his manager at the time, Alan Leeds, is kind of like, you sure you want to sign this? I know it's $100 million and you get this great headline, but this isn't the way that you work, and they want you to play the game. So he signs it, 1992. Within 2 years, he's already frustrated with them because he's written probably 4 or 5 albums worth of material. He's done 2 or 3 albums on his own record label, the imprint of Warner Brothers, Paisley Park, that are basically girlfriends getting an album created for them. One of whom is Carmen Electra from MTV.
Yeah, I remember.
He named her Carmen Electra when she turned up at Paisley Park as Tara Patrick. He renames her to Carmen Electra. So these things aren't selling.
Did you say Tara Patrick?
I believe that's her name. I know there's someone else with a very similar name, isn't it?
We won't get into that, but okay.
I believe that might be why he actually thought to rename her.
Okay.
But you sort of fast forward to 1994, 95, and it's not going well. They want him to play the game. He signed the contract saying he would play the game, and he isn't. He's still recording far too much material for the record company set up to consume. So come 94, 95, it's starting to boil over, and he starts writing slave on his face because he sees the contract as a form of slavery. And I believe it was Michael Bland, the drummer around that time, said he had a phone call that he overheard with the head of Warner Brothers talking about the next album. And Prince said, well, I haven't put pen to paper yet with lyrics or anything like that. And the guy said, don't worry, I'm sure it'll be great. It'll be a great album for us. And he used the words, we already own it. And Prince sort of put the phone down, and Michael Bland says, he thought, I haven't actually created anything, but they're already the owners of wherever it is that comes out of me. Mm-hmm. And that really didn't sit right with him. He's a very intelligent guy, and that sort of started the ball rolling. Now, at the time, for someone to write slave on their face, a black man in the 1990s, it did not go down well.
Yeah.
Particularly one who is already wealthy, is already successful. And his manager at the time, Alan Leeds, actually said, how can you think you're a slave? If you're a slave, you're the only one who ever owned the plantation.
Yeah,
so
I get that.
It was a real strong sort of time and a real strong stance for Prince to take. If we look back now, we kind of, with hindsight and perspective on the whole thing, he was doing what every artist should have been doing, standing up for themselves, get their real worth. There's no reason why the recording industry should be 85% goes to the guy in charge and 15% at most goes to the artist, minus all the costs. So I think he was ahead of his time. But once that happened, and he frayed the relationship with Warner Brothers enough that they decide we need to start parting ways here. He had 5 albums left on the contract and basically just gave them stuff out the vault. And it was dismissed as throwaways and cast-offs. But in reality, there's some really amazing material, of course,
I bet, yeah.
Prince albums.
Yeah.
But they just weren't publicized or, tidied up as much as they should have been before they were given to the public. But he then basically starts his own proper record label, NPG Records. And he then becomes his own record company with distribution, promotion. All of these things were Did he get it right? No. And it was a hard time because the internet was nascent. So he tried to use the internet as a way to distribute the items. And then as much as you can collect 1,000 names of people who want to buy a 3 CD set, it's really hard to then go and get them pressed up and delivered and arrive on time for the date that you've agreed. So there were lots of administrative issues, but that MPG Records lasts 20 something years, right up until his death. It was still a functioning music label in effect.
Can we let's just take a second, because this is a fascinating story. I also want to tell yourself and everyone out there that, whenever I've kind of gotten into a band or music, I learn a lot about them very quickly. Within a matter of weeks, a month or two, you start to really, start to feel that you're a source of information for that band. I've come to realize, and I love everyone out there, the inundation of information about Prince. This is a very unique person, a very unique individual, unlike no other. And I've kind of come to the realization the past few weeks that really, when you get into Prince and you start learning about him, you guys often use the term a rabbit hole. I'm going to use the term he's a life study. Like, this isn't something, this is going to go on for years for me to kind of get up to speed with everything about him. The different songs, the different albums, the different live performances, certain things about him, his beliefs, his thoughts, his methods, all that stuff. It's going to take me a long period of time, but I'm definitely enjoying the ride. But I wanted to talk a little bit before we continue, and then we'll talk more about the whole thing with the record deal. Let's just talk about the 90s for a second, okay? Recordings were starting to be done in digital format. The internet started to come into form of what was called the internet. I remember before it was called the internet. I remember in the late 80s, I had a friend in my grade. He had an Atari 1040 ST or something, and he had a modem, and he would like download files and print stuff out and bring it to school. And I won't bring in ufology here, but Bob Lazar, you'll hear his name a lot. He printed out this thing in 1989 when the whole Bob Lazar thing came out, and it was scary. I was reading this going, oh my God, some of the stuff. This is like 1988, 1989. So I'm just trying to say I was kind of aware of, they called them BBS boards back then.
Yeah, bulletin boards.
Yeah, okay, before it was like the internet. But anyway, and it was all your tech geeky friends that kind of did that. I had a friend, he was downloading games, I think, off BBS boards in the late 80s. So, but anyway, so for artists, I know they started recording in a digital format in the late 80s, early 90s. Don't quote me exactly. The internet started to appear. Grunge music came out. I know, coming from the metal hard rock shred type of school, I really resented grunge music, except Alice in Chains. I've always loved that band because they killed music that I loved. But I think that they had an impact on the music industry, except unless you were like really one of the top metal bands, Pantera, Metallica, it just crushed all the other hard rock metal bands. And I've heard stories of different bands, the record labels saying, like, can you do more of an alternative grunge type of album? Can you dress, a little differently? Can you? I'm wondering how that had any trickle down effect into the overall pop, or I wonder if that affected Prince with his record label at all.
I don't know. It's a tough question.
Yeah.
One thing I should really point out, because the fan community will kill me if I don't.
Yeah.
He never really took to digital recording.
No. Okay.
He liked tape. The night he passed away, fresh tape was left on the machine.
Okay.
And the next morning, after the whole situation had been tidied up at Paisley Park, the engineer checked, and there was a recording on that tape. So he'd recorded music on tape the night of his passing. Now, they would put it into Pro Tools and do a lot of the things that modern producers will want to do and engineers will want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But left to his own devices, he knew how those old machines worked, and he knew how to get what he needed out of them quickly.
Yeah.
So up until like the mid 2000s, he resisted as long as he could, and then he let them sort of digitize the editing process.
Mm-hmm.
As to the heavier side of rock music, I would imagine he listened to anything that was melodic or commercially successful,
Mm-hmm.
because he was always, as much as, so there's an unspoken rule. If Prince said it in an interview, don't think that's true. He was a master of manipulation of the media. He was a master of creating an enigma.
Mm-hmm.
Some of his best interviews that, you know, people look to, where they think he's his most natural,
Mm-hmm.
you actually go through the transcript and there's nothing there, you know.
Well,
it doesn't tell you anything.
On that note, I have an interesting question for you. So you had sent me a very interesting email. We haven't really discussed it yet, so it can be kind of a private thing.
Yep.
Regarding something to do with Prince and yourself. It's not my place to say anything, but what I will say is that I saw an interview with him with Arsenio Hall last night. It was an all Prince night last night for me.
Yeah.
And Arsenio Hall said, "Do you have a cell phone?" He said, "No." And Arsenio Hall said, "Well, how do you survive in this world without a cell phone?" He said, "Everyone else I know has one." But
yeah,
I don't know if I completely believe that, because with the story that you sent today, we don't have to get into it today. It's a private, personal thing.
I'm more than happy to talk about it and probably clear the air, certainly for myself. Just touching on the cell phone thing, it was understood that he had one, and then it was somehow hacked or lost, and he was worried that things that maybe recordings that shouldn't see the light of day might see the light of day. So by all accounts, he did get rid of his cell phone, but the bodyguards or the people at Paisley Park, he would forever be tapping them, like, let me use your phone, let me use your phone.
Okay.
So that he could, so the bodyguard would normally be the guy who handed his phone over, so he could make a call. The story that you're alluding to,
great story, by the way. It's as a guitar player, I'm thinking it's a great story. It's a great way to wake up in the morning. Oh, I got an email from Solitary Adventure, and it's this great story. I really loved it.
So I'll try and make it brief, because it tends to get out of control as a story. So in 2016, I decided I wanted to buy one of those Magcat Telecasters. That, is it Hohner or Horner? Hohner.
Yeah, you say tomato, I say tomato. Or actually, so
okay.
If I'm Canadian, I'm saying tomato. You're probably the one saying tomato.
Tomato. Yeah. So the Horner guitar, the infamous, that we all know behind the scenes, he was playing on all the records. So I decided I want to buy one. I'd find one on Reverb, which was a music site for buying and selling musical items.
Yeah.
And I find a guy who is actually selling one in England. So when I meet him to do the handover, he mentions to me that a friend of his is a luthier, a guitar maker, who had made a guitar for Prince, but Prince never collected it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think much of it. I say to the guy, send me a link to this guitar. I'd like to see it. So this is February the 10th, 2016. So Prince is still alive. Everything's rosy in the world. Prince is on his piano and a microphone tour. The next day, when I wake up to go to work, there's an email from the guy with a link to this guitar that's being created by this luthier called Simon, who works under the name of Gus Guitars. And it's a really striking gold and purple, like the ultimate Prince guitar. If someone just sort of caricatured Prince and guitar, that's what you'd get.
Mm-hmm.
So in my stupor, having just woken up at 5 a.m., I just tweaked the link to Prince Third Eye Girl, was the Twitter handle at the time. Do you remember this? She's a beauty. And the link to this Gus Guitars.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anything of it. A couple of months later, as we know, Prince passes away, and everybody's sort of scratching around. When was the last time he was seen publicly? And there's this photo of him holding up a purple and gold guitar, and because of the unique shape of it, it's quite evident in the photo. It's that guitar. So I reach out to the guy that I know that I bought my guitar off, who's friends with the luthier. And I said, I need to know what's happened here.
Mhm.
So it filters through to me that, so considering I sent the tweet on the 11th of February, mid-February, the caretaker, who's also the drummer occasionally for Prince, Kirk Johnson, reaches out to Gus Guitars saying, what can you tell me about this guitar? The boss wants to know more, effectively. They have a little negotiation, and then the guitar is sent as rapidly as he can. I think he had to do something with the case over to Prince in Minneapolis, but Prince is on tour with the piano and a microphone, so it sits kind of waiting for him to get back off the tour. So in the sort of time that passed, I started piecing a little bit more together. When I was out in Minneapolis for Celebration 2019, I actually managed to speak to Kirk Johnson. And I said, you remember that guitar, the one that's out in the foyer now? Yeah. I said, how did Prince ask you to reach out to the guy? He said he'd left a post-it note on the monitor of the computer. Get in touch with this guy, find out what it's all about. And I said, do you know if it was because of this tweet? And he said, yeah, the post-it note that he left me was your tweet. So that kind of, drew the full circle for me. And it was quite astonishing to think, that all the stars aligned. And then
he saw one of your tweets, man.
Yeah, but this guitar had been floating around for maybe 10 years. I think the guy had actually built it in 2007 during Prince's 21 Nights at the O2. He couldn't get it to Prince. He put it up for sale in Harrods for 3 years and it didn't sell. And then it just sat under his workbench or in his loft or his attic or something for, half a dozen years. And even now when I see interviews with Simon from Gus Guitars, he just thinks it magically Prince stumbled on it and sent him an email. Yeah. And it's a little bugbear of mine because nobody was talking about that guitar at the time. And then obviously within a day or so and the one thing that I left out, when I went back and checked the tweet activity on the original message that I'd sent, I had like 50 followers on Twitter. It wasn't a platform I used.
Yeah.
There were only 2 interactions. One was a girl from California who liked the tweet. And then, of course, the other one had to be Paisley Park, didn't it? It had to be Prince. So really, really cool thing to happen.
I love that story. When I read the whole story in your email, I was like, man, that was just a great way to wake up today reading that. I don't want to take up too much time talking about Twitter, but I was on Twitter a little bit many years ago. For some reason, I just never really got onto it. But one of the things I always like doing with social media, and I'll kind of tie it into the channel, and then we'll get back to the story, what we're talking about. With Twitter, I almost treat it like a little bit of a game. Like it'd be like if there's someone that I admired or really liked, not in a stalking kind of way, but if there's a guitar player that I really liked, or I'd send funny tweets. There's my all-time favorite personal guitar player. It's a story. As I said, as the channel gets bigger, maybe one day I'll have him on, who knows, but I'll do some videos about it. But when I had Twitter, he's a big coffee guy and he really likes Pete's Coffee down in the States. He's American, but he's toured all over. He's familiar with Canada. So in Canada, the most famous coffee is Tim Hortons, okay, after the hockey player who passed away in the 70s. And it's a big chain, and we joke that they must have cocaine in their coffee, because you drive through any Canadian town at 5 or 6 in the morning, the Tim Hortons on the main street, the drive-through will be out blocking and down like. So, and I've never been a coffee guy, but I've recently, my girlfriend, she has a Keurig, and she let me try. I'm trying to watch my sugar intake, but the French vanilla cappuccino one, it's a nice treat. That's what I was drinking. Thank you, Tim Hortons. But I would tweet him and I would say, is Tim Hortons better than Pete's? And he'd be like, and he'd tweet me back and he'd say, is Nickelback better than Rush? But what I'm trying to say is, like, I know the feeling of someone that you kind of admire or you admire, when they acknowledge you. So in the sense that, you know, of how you feel about Prince, to know deep down, and you have the proof now that he saw your tweet and he kind of acknowledged it in his own way.
Yeah,
that's an
in his
amazing
own way.
story. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So do people still use
Yeah.
Twitter? Do you know, or like I don't.
They do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a bit of a putrid mess, though, isn't it? I mean, I actually got rid of my Twitter recently because I just think 99% of it is designed to make you feel bad.
Yeah.
And the 1% of good that it actually did wasn't worth the effort, you know.
When it comes to the social media, it's like, I'm not a fan of Facebook. I realized one day, you get up, you scroll through Facebook, and it's people complaining, listing all the problems, as trivial as they may be, and also when the pandemic happened, I people can believe whatever they want. I don't care, but it's the fighting, and you're reading it going, man, like I don't. This is putting me in a bad mood. And
while
then,
we're talking about social media, if I was to say the NPG Music Club, does that mean anything to you?
Which one?
The NPG, so Prince's band, the New Power Generation Music Club. So in the late 90s, being technically minded, you know, Prince sort of kept his pulse on everything. He realizes that this internet thing could be great for distribution.
Yes.
And like we mentioned, you know, he tries to print his own CDs up, and that doesn't go as well as he would have liked. But he was sort of a pioneer in that he decided, well, if I just charge a subscription and put the files up for download.
I think I heard about this years ago.
Maybe we can do that. So for 3 or 4 years, he had his own version of what would later become iTunes, you know, that entire concept. But it was quite financially successful, I think, the first year or so. And then, like any project, Prince kind of lost interest, and the level of exclusivity that he was given the MPG Music Club kind of seemed to dwindle, and we didn't get much for the last couple of years of subscription fees.
I heard I remember hearing something about it back in the day.
It was fantastic because as a fan, and I don't use the term fan, which I know is cropping up a lot in the comments, because I've spent the last 2 days cataloging bootlegs. If I'm not fanatic, then I don't know who is. So I'm more than happy to be called a fan.
That's why we love having you on. Yeah. Yeah.
So as a fan, we were given the opportunity to take the front row seats at venues, at concerts, because as part of your membership, you got first dibs on the tickets. You know, which is fantastic.
It is fantastic. And there's been other people in the comment section who have said that they've done that. And I think that's really amazing. And I got to bring up another topic tied to what you're talking about. And Prince himself has said that the internet's a double-edged sword when it comes to musicians. And we know that he was, you know, and I'm not judging him for this, but he was very ruthless with YouTube before he had passed.
Yeah.
Don Henley from the Eagles, he has a paid staff that daily they go in, they put their 40 hours a week in, and they scour YouTube for, you know, I get that. Don Henley's a different story. You know, when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of your fans, and then you there's got to be kind of a line somewhere. But I need to ask you, this is an interesting topic, the whole Metallica Napster thing. Do you know where Prince's stance was on that and what they were doing? I'll give people I'll just to give you a second to kind of formulate what you're thinking. So that all started. So I think Prince was in the studio. Metallica was in the studio recording the song "I Disappear" this is around 2000. It was a Mission Impossible soundtrack or something, and somehow a recording of it leaked out and started playing. And then they found out that it was through Napster that it got spread all over the world. So they hadn't even released this song yet, and it was people already had access to it. That's what really ticked them off. Now the fan backlash was like, man, you guys are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, what's the big deal? But they're just trying to say, hey, man, do we not have a right to like finish our song and mix it properly before we even? So I'm really curious because of where Prince's stance was with the internet and distribution. I wonder if he ever commented on the Metallica Napster thing, or if anyone knows what his stance was.
I can't remember specifically at the time what his stance was, but he was always the contrarian, or certainly if you look at his actions, they seem contrary. Now, here's a guy who has his own music store. He's got one of the most vibrant fan communities for bootlegs, and has had since the late 80s. We spoke earlier about, what was the internet like before HTTP and the World Wide Web, www. You could go onto the early internet and go to news groups, which were basically like a Facebook wall, and you could go into each post and you could download files.
Yeah.
Alt.music.prints was home to quite a lot of us. And when that got shut down, we all found our way onto chat channels, and we would, the Royal Hub, I remember in the late 90s, we would all swap bootlegs back and forth. Now, Prince was quoted quite late in his career, relatively, as saying, I've got some bootlegs at home and I wouldn't sell them. So anyone who swaps them for free, I've got no problem with. So he had quite a sort of, everything shades of grey with him. It's never black and white. So I don't know about the specific Metallica issue, but if you look at the overriding theme to all of his anti-internet in later years, it wasn't that he didn't want the fans to necessarily have the content. It was more that the financial side of things didn't sit well with him. So YouTube would get the views and he would get 0.00001 pence for each view.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to cut it with a guy who writes his own contracts and, does his own thing. So a lot of his stance was take it down, because financially, this isn't right that you get all the benefits and I get nothing.
Yeah.
Because that's even worse than the contracts he was signing with Warner Brothers. And then if you look at Napster specifically, Napster died as soon as the record industry finally woke up and then started to try and take control of the horse that had already bolted. Yeah. And Napster very quickly lost its users. But Prince put a single out through Napster, and I think it was 2004, because he knew that the actual distribution network was still there. People still had the software.
He's very
so
smart.
There was a song that was released out. Yeah. And that's why, we're talking about a guy who put an album out in Target, because the record store had died, effectively, the high street record store.
Yeah.
So what do? Where are the people?
Yeah.
So 15 million people a week going through Target. Yeah, sell there. And, they'll pay upfront because they're going to need to stock their shelf. So he'll do quite well straight away.
In your travels, have you ever been to a Target store?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Do they have them in the UK?
We have a couple of stores that are like Target. We don't actually have Target, but it's a strange one. I need to look into it, because Walmart own a British superstore called Asda. And the store that I'm kind of thinking of in this country is like Matalan, TK Maxx. There's a few of them that are kind of variations of Target. And I would imagine they've probably got a parent company in common with them.
Well, it's funny with Target because, when I had my music school and it was busy and it was running, it was a private school out of my home. I had, instructors working for me and everything. And so this is around 2011, 2012, 2013. Small town Canada, 10, 12,000 people. There's a Walmart in that town. Yep. And all of a sudden, a few blocks away, I live near the Little Town Mall, and Target moved in with a bang. And I think it actually helped my business, because parents would drop the teenagers off and then they would go shop at Target for half an hour while the lesson went on. And then all of a sudden, boom, just gone. And, this isn't about Target, so I don't want to make it, but I'm just getting to the point that they didn't do well in Canada. They were there for 2 years and then packed up and lost billions of dollars. But when I go to the States, I love Target. I love that store. I don't even know what it is. I walk in there and I'm like, I see red.
There's one just down the road from Chanhassen, and I think it was Leanne La Havas, who's a brilliant UK artist, absolute voice of an angel, tremendous guitar player. And Prince and her became friends in, I think it was 2011,
Hmm.
but she would regularly sort of drop out and go and see Prince in Chanhassen. But she told a little story of running down to the Target to buy some clothes, not expecting to stay as long as she was in Chanhassen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the strange avenues that he chose for distribution and electronic, he was quoted in 2010, I think, as saying the internet is over. And of course, mainstream media, being as lazy as they are now, print it, verbatim, and then start to chastise this guy who basically pioneered the concept of selling, via the iTunes model. And I think what he really meant was it's dead as a means of making any money. And if you look at artists now, as good as the internet has been for the listener, it's been absolutely catastrophic on the artist, because
Yeah.
if you go on YouTube, you can get anybody's back catalogue, listen to entire albums,
Yeah.
and they're getting pennies, if that, for the effort.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm a tech guy, so I kind of am looking at the next version of what the internet is going to grow into. And one of the things that I think Prince would have liked about what's going on now is this idea of the NFT, and a way that you can digitally give royalties every time a song is played. And I
Yeah.
think, had he been around now, it's the kind of thing that, I'd sort of rely on him to have a sniff at and see if he could make it work. And he had such a vibrant community, like
Yeah.
we still are, that I think we would have embraced all of these things that he could have made this technology do.
No, absolutely. So getting back to the recording, the whole issue with the record label, for sure. When you went to Paisley Park, I'm just curious, and I'm writing down my questions as we talk. Do you get to see much of the recording setups in Paisley Park on the tours, or when you can go in and walk around?
You do. So the two main studios, A and B. A
Okay.
is a fantastic large room, big enough to take an orchestra. It's the real deal, and it's got isolation booths for piano, drums. That room, you get to stand in the main studio hall, and if you look through the window into the control booth, you can see the Lynn machine, the Oberheim synth, so everything that you needed for When Doves Cry is kind of sat behind that window.
Yeah.
Not that it was recorded in that room, but the equipment that you kept right up until the end. Studio B, you get to do a lot more, because that's the place where, if you've been on Instagram and you see people standing next to a picture of him on the wall, and then you get your photo taken, that's all in Studio B. And they have
Okay.
a ping pong table, a table tennis table, because he loved to play table tennis in
Yes.
between songs and takes. So you can actually have a game of table tennis if you're any good, while you're waiting for everyone to have their photo taken.
Yeah.
But you get to go into the control room of Studio B,
Okay.
and they will play you normally a snippet of a song. It might just be the Ultimate Tour, but if you're in that room, they'll play something through the speakers of a song that you worked on.
So when Prince was alive, just so I can have it straight in my head here, when Prince was alive, part of the business model of Paisley Park was other well-known acts would come to Paisley Park and rent out studio time in the studios. Or was that
It
after he
started
died?
that way.
It
No,
started
no,
that way.
it started that way. So of
Yeah.
course he's spent $10 million of his own money. He's built this fantastic recording
Yeah.
studio. Once it's open for business, late '87, quite a few people go and record there. Fine Young Cannibals, Stevie Wonder does a little bit of something in the mid '90s, like I think Conversation Piece album. Celine Dion. There's, it's on the map for recording a record label to put their artist forward if they wanted somewhere where it's full service, and maybe the kind of artist who doesn't want the distractions of LA. You don't want to be caught falling out of the Viper pit at 3 a.m, and
Yeah.
you need to do some proper recording.
Yeah.
But Prince being Prince, he starts to throw a bit of a spanner in the works. So there were a couple of times where he actually had bands thrown out because he wanted to record, because it's his studio.
You mentioned this to
So
me. Yes.
Yeah, you start to get a little bit of the petulant, egotistical side of, what is still a relatively young Prince. And, he's 30, mid-30s.
Mhm.
So at some point, he just kind of rolls up the shutters as Paisley to outside people.
Okay.
Now, there's also a soundstage in there. So there's adverts being recorded there. McDonald's did one, Coca-Cola did one. So there's elements of it staying open commercially, but in terms of musical artists using the studios, he kind of drops the hammer on that and says, it's my place. I'm gonna use it.
But the original
There are
business model,
periods,
yeah, the original
and
business. Sorry.
yeah, no, just to preempt what you're going to say, the original business model, of course, you've got to pay engineers, you've got to pay staff. If you just rent out one of the 3 or 4 studio rooms, because there's the 2 big ones, and then there's a smaller rehearsal one, and then there's a tiny one that some kid in their bedroom on a laptop now will be doing.
Yeah.
You couldn't do in 1988, but you could go to Studio D in Paisley Park and rent that for a small sum. The business model would say he should be making some money off this commercially just to make it viable. But early 90s Prince isn't financially that great. And
Okay.
he
You had mentioned that as
pulls
well.
the plug. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good. So if you go to Paisley Park, you actually get to see the recording studios.
Yes.
The interesting thing is when you're talking is like about this, like in the late 80s, early 90s, I remember being a, up and coming young musician. Even the thought of, doing a demo was daunting because it cost thousands of dollars because you had to go to an actual recording studio. Where now with the advent of home recording technology, like for the people out there that don't know, Pro Tools is the industry standard for recording in most studios now. There's different things that, my little setup here, when I record here at home, it's what's called Cubase, and I record it. It's actually on a computer that's 10 years old. It's not connected to the internet. It works great. I don't want anything to mess with it. And then, unfortunately, although we live out in a very sparse area, my next door neighbor has a really awesome recording studio, so he can mix and master anything.
Yeah.
But he also knows if he wants if he needs some solos cut on whatever he's doing, he can call me anytime, and I'll just walk in and say, sure, what do you need? But anyway,
just an aside to that, obviously me being a tech guy, one of the first things that I looked for when we went into the studios, and there's another room which is a video editing booth where he used to edit the videos. He really was a one-man band, so he would work with a guy or edit the concert footage himself. And then, the DVDs that we sort of were buying in like late 98, early 99, they're edited at Paisley Park. He had a hand in the editing. He had a hand in the editing. So wow. he had his own editing room.
Okay.
And the first thing that I see when I go in there is an old Apple that is basically the last Apple, like a Power G5, just before the internet takes over everything, and all computers are kind of built for the internet. Mm-hmm. And the thought that went through my mind is, I think that's a conscious decision that he stuck with that hardware, because he could be hacked, right? Why wouldn't he? He's Prince. Someone might actually think, if we can just get onto his server, we could get all of these songs. Yeah. So I think there's a conscious decision to just stop upgrading hardware at some point, because it kind of keeps him immune to attack.
Well, I think it was Kiss the Rain that I watched, they talked about like he was really big on perfection, not just as a musician, but with the engineering techniques and stuff. And one of the things, where I'm kind of like, I have this old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But when you get into Pro Tools and stuff, there's always, new updates and new versions and this and that. And it's just endless, where I'm like, I got my little Cubase set up, like I'm not recording albums to be on international platform, like, or an international superstar or anything. But it's a never-ending cycle, like of people, like and then you got to upgrade then with all the upgrades, the computer can only handle so much, and then you got to start upgrading your hardware. So
he hated downtime.
Yeah.
And imagine 1987 when Paisley's being put together, and he's impatient that it's taken 2 days for them to put an entire control board together.
Mhm.
Imagine that impatience if he's got an Apple that keeps needing to be upgraded. And so I think at some point, if it works and you're getting what you need from it, then just don't do anything, don't touch it, just
Yeah.
switch off the internet connection.
But I think that's interesting because I'm kind of leaning towards with his personality. He also might wanted to have kept up with the technology and kept understanding how things work. Where I was kind of like, I'm good. I'm good
I
with my
think
little setup here.
age comes into it, especially on a day like today. I think it pays to remind yourself that, just because he's passed now, we shouldn't rewrite the history and try and create some saintly figure.
Yeah.
He was a man, he had his flaws, but he was also, a
Unique.
point. Well, he is unique and was unique, but at some point you kind of lose some of the youth and some of the patience that, or the desire to search for new avenues. And I think he got to a point where he knew how to do things incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
Do you go down the rabbit hole of trying to keep up with the technology, or just does it age just kind of say to you, you have the tools that you need? And I think that, I think that happened certainly from a technical standpoint. But I think musically, he always had that desire to keep looking and creating new sounds. But that's much easier to do because that's a people thing. You just get new musicians around you and they revitalize and reinvigorate.
Yeah. So coming back full circle to the Warner Brothers things, do you think at some point Warner Brothers realized they're like, we're barking up a tough tree here? He's a very powerful influence in the musical industry. He had a lot of money. I don't know what the deal was with legal fees and with court and everything that went on between him and Warner Brothers, but there is some type of resolve, isn't there, with this whole thing?
There is. So I think from a financial point of view, both of them are effectively a bottomless pit, aren't they? So they're a lawyer's dream. So I don't think that ever played a part. But the Warner Brothers people that he was dealing with weren't there by the time 92, 93 rolls around and it starts looking litigious.
Mm-hmm.
They've since retired off or moved on, because the music industry is turning from people who were musicians themselves, who maybe ran a studio or maybe were around musicians. It just becomes accountants and lawyers, people who have no musical interest whatsoever. It's just commerce. So by the time it all goes sour and he decides, okay, I want out of this record deal to the extent where I will actually go by an unpronounceable symbol as a name, because your contract says Prince Rogers Nelson. And if I'm not called Prince Rogers Nelson anymore, you try enforcing that contract. I think what they realized was it was starting to get bad publicity wise for them. It was always bad publicity wise for him. And I think at some point they just decided, okay, get what you can to honor the contract and let him go. But if you look at the release dates for probably a decade after, so it kind of resolves itself when the contract runs out at the end of 1999. And he's able to use the name Prince again because he's out of contract with Warner Brothers. But if you look at that 10 years from maybe 1995 onwards, if he tried to put a project out under the symbol name or his own name after 2000, there's a Warner Brothers project at roughly the same time to try and cut into the sales. Now, I think that was a little bit of spite on their side to, maybe stop him from being too successful, because somebody high up in Warner Brothers must have thought, even if you put the slave thing to one side and the symbol, we've got a really big talent here who's just decided he can do it on his own, and he's not failing. He's not selling 15 million albums, but if he's making 90% of the money, not the 15 that we were giving him as a royalty and then taking costs out, if he's actually making 90%, financially, other people might look at this and decide, I don't need a record company either. So I think there was a little bit of, that sort of reaction from Warner's was maybe just to dampen down the success that he had. And also you'd have to look at radio. radio was still something that people consumed then. It would be 2008 before iTunes really just stole radio.
Yeah.
He wasn't played. And you'd have to argue Warner Brothers would have enough power to say, it wouldn't be great if you played his music, and that would be it, and just take him off the program list. So I think there's a lot that is unsaid, and maybe we'll never know because these people won't speak, and it's not in their interest to speak. But I think he frightened a lot of people that he was able to keep earning good money, and obviously the live performances, he was never ever going to not be able to do them.
He was a powerful person in the industry, and he was a very strong-willed individual, right? He was not like, there's just some people in life you just don't want to try pushing around, especially if they have a lot of money. So well, it's good to see that there was some form of resolution, but I think that was an interesting chapter in just the music industry in itself. Like, a lot of, you hear a lot of horror stories about record companies, and we briefly talked about Van Halen, and I believe it was Warner Brothers, their first album, they were like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, like they were owned.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up for that one today. Again, it's a sad day, but I always enjoy talking to you, and getting your email this morning with that story really was a nice way to start this particular day. And but we'll get some more feedback from the community and see a bit more topics that they'd like to be discussed. And always a pleasure to have you on, and we will have you back on soon.
Great,
remember,
thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So remember, folks, practice hard, but practice smart, and we'll see you soon.